Ladies and gentlemen, the meeting of the Wadsworth Planning Commission will please come to order. The first item on our agenda is public participation. I note that we have 2 public hearings set this evening and also a couple other items. And anybody in the audience who is here to address the Planning Commission regarding those topics will have the opportunity to do so. But if there's anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission on any other appropriate topic, we'd be glad to hear from you. Please come forward to the podium and give us your name and address. Seeing none, I will move on with the agenda. I'm going to skip around on the agenda to move things along a little quickly. I'm going to go down to new business. This is a consolidation plat at 511 Bird Street, city lots 969 and 9993, Jessica and Marcus Fowler, I think, property owners, an R3 residential district. Mr. Kaiser.
Okay, the plat takes 2 properties that are owned by the applicants and consolidates them into one new lot. You can see the first lot, which I believe is City Lot 969. It fronts Bird Street, has a single-family home. The second lot, 9993, is directly behind it. It's about twice the size, so it's about a ½ acre, I believe, or pretty close to it. It's pretty much vacant except for some play structures that the owners have on it. So they want to consolidate it. It's a landlocked parcel, so it really has no value unless consolidated with the main lot. Looked it over. The engineering department had no issues. They'll assign a new lot number. I'm not sure if they've done that yet. And there may be some minor revisions, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. So I would recommend the commission approve this consolidation plat, city lots 969 and 9993 at 511 Bird Street, subject to the applicants making any corrections to the Mylar as needed before the plat's released for approval. But pretty standard item here.
Any questions for Mr. Kaiser?
Mr. Kaiser, can I ask what triggered this? Have they owned the property, or?
I guess so. We can talk to the applicants. I think they've just owned it, and they may want to do some expansions that may cross that internal property line. So, but other than that, I don't know why.
Okay, thank you.
And they're not here, so I guess we won't get that answer. All right, if there's no other questions from Mr. Kaiser, is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Planning Commission approve the consolidation of plat for city lots 969 and 9993 at 511 Bird Street, subject to the applicant making a Mylar or corrections to the Mylar as needed.
Second.
Heard the motion, the second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. The other item under new business is a revised subdivision plat, creating 3 new building lots at the reserves of Briarthorn. Mr. Kaiser.
Okay, hold on here. Make sure I pulled up the right plat. I hope this is it. Okay, so in this case, back in January, you might remember we had a meeting. Briarthorn, the reserves of Briarthorn was looking for plat approval. They were doing 3 lots on the north side of Briarthorn Crescent, and then 9 additional lots in a new private street on the south side of the Crescent. Again, the point would be to build, to create 12 building sites to be sold to a third-party home builder for construction. So right now, the applicant would now like to proceed in phases. So the original approval, which handled all 12 lots, is being revised to just creating these 3 lots, which do have frontage on Briarthorn Way. Most of the improvements that are needed to service these lots are either exist or they're under construction. I believe the plat does show, and I'm not sure how I can zoom in on this one, But there's an area here between Briarthorn Way and the Crescent where a detention basin is going to go for these lots. I think that's still under construction, but they'd like to move forward to get these 3 lots platted and sold. The second phase, which is the remaining 9 units, will be platted at a later date. Apparently, during the due diligence process, a potential home builder had a geotechnical engineer go out and do some additional studies. There are some underground mines in the area and they do affect this particular site. So that engineer expressed concerns with the suitability of the site for those units. So the applicant's removing this lot and the proposed 9 lots from the subdivision so they can further investigate the situation for themselves, determine whether or not any lots can be built on there. They may have to reconfigure how the site lays out. But that would be handled once they've addressed the situation. They'd come back and replant these 9 additional lots, or however many they can get, whether it be 9 or something less. So the 3 lots on the north side of the Crescent aren't impacted by the mines, and so they would like to move forward with that. I don't see any issues or objections. In fact, we actually suggested they do it in phases before they submitted back in January. So this really goes back to what one of our original recommendations to the landowner was. So I would recommend approve the revised subdivision plan, creating the building sites, as well as 1 open space block, subject to the 2 conditions as noted in the staff report. Those actually came from the January 13th report. They're still applicable. So just speaking briefly with our economic development director as well as city engineer, we'll look at that. It may be that a development agreement for these 3 lots may not be required if everything's in place. But again, we're still tying it to completion of all improvements before they can turn the lots over for sale to a final owner. So I think the conditions should probably just stay as they're written.
Any questions from the commission for Mr. Kaiser?
I do. Mr. Kaiser, are these the 3 lots that, when this was initially discussed with Planning Commission, that the vision of the builder was that these would be the 3 model homes for a period of time?
Yes, I believe these 3 were to be owned by a home builder who was going to buy all 9 lots, or all 12 lots, excuse me. They would put 3 different model homes on these sites and show the public what they would build. That particular home builder is out of the picture right now. So we don't know what's going to happen with the other 9 units at this time until they can figure out what to do. Again, sometimes there's differences of opinions between professional engineers. The one working for the home builder company might be a little more conservative. However, I would note that the mine seam that does affect the northeastern part of this site also affects a lot of the homes that are already constructed on Fieldcrest Court up there. But I think it was just a concern with, I think in this area, the roof of the mine was only 55 feet below grade, whereas when you head further to the north, it gets a lot deeper, 89 or 90. So I think they have a second home buyer in here who's willing to construct these. Again, we would hold issuing of any occupancy permits until the detention basin's done and all of the other improvements have been checked and signed off.
So that's the important avenue. I think when we were discussing it under the initial plan, you made certain that there were some assurances in place so that these lots were not sold, if you will, until improvements were made. We still have those same assurances at this point.
And I think we do, and I think that might be the reason we're still going to have a development agreement, even if 90% of the improvements are in place. We want to make sure that 100% are done or somehow financially guaranteed if they're public improvements before they can turn around and sell.
Fair enough, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Burgoon?
Hello, Joe Burgoon, Lewis Land Professionals. I think we're good with everything. One comment and maybe a question for Jeff is, there was a development agreement recorded based on the 12 lot setup, which I don't think necessarily is changing, because I think...
Okay, has that been recorded? I wasn't aware that it was.
Yeah, it was recorded. I have the recording number on the plat.
Okay. If that's done, then we're set.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
Conditions, thank you.
I'd
Conditions still apply?
just leave them as is, just in case that agreement has to be modified in some way, shape, or form.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. These conditions that still apply?
Yes.
All right, or recommendations? Okay. All right, any questions from Mr. Kaiser? If not, are we ready for a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that the Planning Commission accept the revised subdivision plat creating 3 new building sites at the reserves of Briarthorn for lot number 10313 for the Josh Land LLC, subject to the 2 staff recommendations.
Second.
You've heard the motion, the second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I will return now to old business. First item was the minutes of the February 10th and 24th meetings, which will be distributed at a future meeting. The next item is a public hearing, which was set for 7 o'clock, which is a new planned unit development regulations to replace existing 154.030 and 154.031. Mr. Kaiser.
Okay, these text revisions will replace our current PUD regulations. As you mentioned, those are 154.030 and 031 of the current code. The new provisions are basically 151.030 through, I think it's 045. So it's a little bit, been a little bit longer. I think we broke it out a little, a little finer. But as we've noted many times here, the current PUD regulations really function as an overlay zoning district. They don't really change the underlying zoning of the property. They just allow us certain modifications to how the property is developed, whereas a true planned unit development actually results in a new zoning district and a general development plan, which serves as a preliminary plat, and then future, all construction has to follow that general plan. And because it is a new zoning district, City Council is involved because they would adopt the planned unit development district that would allow for the general plan and the approved uses. So the key provisions of the text, new sections 154.030 through 036 basically outline and discuss the basic components of a plan. Like our old, like the existing code, there is a purpose and objectives paragraph explaining what the purposes of a PUD are, what it allows. We've also added a section on additional definitions that are used frequently but not really spelled out in our current code. A lot of those deal with types of allowable housing, townhouse units versus cluster lots and condominiums. They're all ownership types, but the net effect is that if they're freestanding, they're single-family dwellings, no matter how they're owned or how they are platted. 154.032 exists somewhat in our current code. It just talks about when doing a planned unit development, if there's differences between what this section says and other code sections, this kind of prevails. 033, this is a new provision that's required because since we're changing how we approve PUDs, what do you do with the ones that have been approved under the old regulations? So this section would say that all previously approved PUDs, they're going to continue in effect and be considered legally conforming uses. So it doesn't impact any of the projects we've approved in the past. 034, minimum project area requirements. That's pretty much the same as what's in the existing code. I think typically we need at least 25 acres to do a PUD. Ownership, everything needs to be in one ownership, or all the current owners need to sign off on the application. Site locations, again, currently, because our PUD regs are an overlay district, I think we allow them in R1 and R2 districts. Okay. This says really PUDs may be located anywhere in the city. They can be used to develop large areas on the periphery that have, just recently annexed or are subject to annexation. They might also be used in existing lots that, for whatever reason, never really developed, or where there's certain site conditions that we need some type of open space development like a PUD to help it. I think the only real change is that our current regulations require 30% common open space. We've reduced that a little bit to 25%. That's still a quarter of the land acre has to be maintained as open space. And here is one of the bigger changes. 154.035 talks about some of the general requirements, and one of them is what kind of uses are going to be permitted and in what type of structures. So typically PUDs are used for residential dwellings, so we're allowing those as permitted within the PUD. Multifamily dwellings, as long as they don't exceed 30% of the total housing units, would be fine. The accessory structures for those units, such as garages, etc., and anything else that would be spelled out in the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Because some of the lots may be smaller. If they're townhouse lots, they may not have a lot of area, so they may prohibit things that our zoning code would allow. For instance, if someone wanted to build a garage on their property, they can come get a permit to do so. But if the lots are small and the CCRs state that what you buy is what you get, because there's really no room to expand, those would take precedent. The PUD also allows compatible non-residential uses, such as restaurants, bars, coffee shops, etc., some small offices and small retail shops. And again, those would be subject to other restrictions that are noted later in this section, or that might be imposed as part of a PUD development agreement. Off-street parking for non-residential uses is permitted, and there are provisions that would allow the commission to reduce those requirements when a non-residential use is within a quarter mile of city-owned parking lots, or parking lots on other properties for which they've got a cross-parking agreement. And finally, I think the other allowable spaces would be the open space, the community clubhouses, playgrounds, and trails that would be constructed in there. Those would be owned and maintained by the unit owners associations for the benefit of the owners and occupants within the PUD. Number B is new. That talks about allowable residential dwelling types, and that's where the definitions came in for things like the townhouses and cluster homes. Because sometimes things get a little mixed up between what, is a condominium the same as a freestanding home? Well, they're different. They're the same uses. They're just different ownership and different development patterns. So wanted to make sure that these are the types of housing products that would be permitted within the PUD. Conditionally permitted uses, I think those should be eliminated. They're really not appropriate for a PUD because in a PUD you basically spell out everything that you're going to have within the boundaries of that. So everything should either be permitted, as approved, or not permitted. Densities, typically in the past we've tied them to the underlying density of the R1 or R2 district. This gets a little more complicated, but the proposed density of a PUD should be based on a lot of different factors. One, the existing built conditions in the vicinity, what the comprehensive plan recommends for uses and densities in the vicinity. Adequacy of the city's road network and utilities to provide necessary service. And also, a big factor should be what's going to promote economic development, land development, and really meet some of the housing goals of the comprehensive plan. So there may be situations where the plan doesn't specifically say we want some condos here or high density mixed use type developments, but they might be appropriate given what's built. And I'm thinking mainly up around, in the High Street corridor, and as you get to the east and kind of head out to Hartman Road. And I think that's a critical area where maybe a PUD with higher densities might be appropriate. We also have some typical lot area and dimension requirements. These would apply to 1, 2, and 3 family dwelling types. And so we spelled out some minimum lot areas, frontage requirements for the fee simple lots, single family, 1, 2, and 3 family, as well as townhouses, because typically townhouses are going to be attached, 3, 4, 5 units. So they're going to be somewhat narrow. They may or may not have backyards. It may just be the entire building may take up the building site. But we do have some requirements for that. And again, in terms of the actual setbacks, again, I think those can vary based on the housing typology, where it's located. But when we do have, standard fee simple lot or even a reduced sized fee simple lot, we need to have some minimum setbacks, and it's, so it's suggested not be less than 35 feet in order to prevent on-street parking from encroaching into the public right-of-way. So 35-foot setback would allow for a attached garage with front entry. Again, have some minimum setbacks from the front wall to the edge of a private street, and minimum separation between sidewalls or side property lines, except of course in the case of the townhouse units. In terms of accessory structures, because the lots are typically going to be smaller, I think our standard setback for these was 5 feet. I'm suggesting 3 feet would be allowed from the side or rear property lines, unless these things are prohibited by the CCRs that apply to the use. Same thing too, we have issues sometimes with decks and other building additions. So again, if those types of things are permitted by the CCR, they would need to comply with whatever the setbacks have been established for those dwelling types. Again, some general requirements for multifamily and non-residential sites. They need to be designed to accommodate all of the structures and all of the off-street parking and any open space or outdoor use areas. And they need to be appropriately buffered along some of the property lines, especially when they are adjacent to single-family residential type uses. In terms of lot dimensions, building and parking locations, et cetera, those are going to be as approved by the Planning Commission and City Council on the general plan. So there's no minimum lot size requirements because typically those end up with a lot of wasted space, I think. And in a PUD, you might want a building closer to the front property lines and have some of the parking behind it. So I think that the specifics for any non-residential use lot should be reviewed on a case-by-case basis as part of the PUD and general plan review. Common open space, I'd mentioned there that we're reducing that to 25% of the total land area. And so we've codified that. And then off-street parking, there are certain provisions for non-residential parking for non-residential uses to be reduced by up to 50%. Again, those are the cases where we'll discuss a little bit in the next section where you're within walking distance to existing lots. So 154.036 creates some design and development standards. The first one's talked about some basic locational and dimensional requirements for your building lots and freehold dwellings. Those would be the condos. Dwelling units, they should be oriented to face the street and not exceed a height of 50 feet. Again, we're looking at a little bit basic design so that the units face the the street on which they're located, and they're designed to to look attractive. So we want to avoid shallow pitched and flat pitched roofs. There should be some type of complementing relationship between how the building is designed, its mass, its size, and the roof pitch. Again, this one here, attached front-loaded garage, we want those not to project by any more than 5 feet from the front of the house to prevent what's commonly known as a snout house, where the first thing you see is the garage. It'd be preferable to keep the garage a little bit further back from the front wall of the main entry. And then there's a discussion about front porches. Those are encouraged. They should probably be at least 8 feet to be usable, and they should be incorporated in the design of the building. In terms of the non-residential uses, the restaurants and bakeries, what have you, they need to be located along major roadways and near the periphery of the PUD property. Points of vehicular access may be limited by the Planning Commission, and again, use of shared off-street parking facilities would be encouraged because again, that will help reduce their parking requirements and kind of minimize some impacts to stormwater management if we don't have to build as many parking spaces as the code requires, many of which would never go used. There's some other general provisions in there, and as well as some relating to the common open space and how it can be used, how it can be owned. There's provisions in there that if the city or county parks wanted to accept ownership, or in some cases even a land conservancy. I believe Creekside Commons says they are granting some kind of easement to a conservation association who's going to make sure that the open space is maintained. So they're a way to transfer title or at least the development rights to another party, and talks a little bit about what is considered to be open space and what is not. So again, spaces between condominium uses, any part of a required lot's front, rear, or side yards, those don't count. It's just all the space that would be owned in common. And beginning here at 154.037 through the end, this is really where a lot of the changes occur because, again, we are adopting a whole process, and the next few sections just spell out the various steps in that. So PUD is going to require a pre-application meeting, a preliminary discussion meeting, Planning Commission review, and City Council review. Also, just for the benefit of everyone, in addition to those reviews for PUD approval, most developments are required, they're going to go through other development review processes. So we spelled out some of those. The civil site plan review, architectural design review for commercial and multifamily buildings, as well as final planning or subdivision. And that comes when the general plan's been approved, they phase it in. It'll still have to go through the final plat process here at the Planning Commission. 154-30038 talks about the pre-application meeting and what the purpose is and what needs to be submitted. The preliminary discussion meeting, that's a little more formal review. We currently hold these for most projects. It's where administratively the staff gets together to look at the project, discuss some of the issues that we try and resolve before it gets to the Planning Commission. So this really just codifies that particular meeting when it comes to planned unit developments. 154-040 talks about the Planning Commission review. It's very similar to what we do now. I think the big difference is going to be that Planning Commission is actually going to be making a recommendation to City Council regarding adoption of the general plan, all of the specifics of the PUD, as well as the PUD zoning to City Council. So basically, we will look at that, maybe make some changes or recommend changes, but once we've got a plan that Commission feels is suitable for development, we move it up the, move it on to the next step, which is to send it to City Council. Because again, they will adopt a new PUD regulation. So this process is going to take on more of the flavor of a zoning amendment than, say, a conditional zoning review. But it's going to have elements, it's going to have some site plan review elements as well as zoning recommendations to council. And then 154-041 talks about what goes on at the City Planning Commission, at City Council, what the effects of their adoption would be, and that's basically to let the project move on to the next steps, which are starting to prepare the civil site plans for the various phases. Again, it codifies some of the stuff we already know, that the approved general plan is basically the preliminary plat. It's the basis for the future subdivision. But it's also the master plan for how the lot shall be developed. 154, we go into a little more specifics about those additional review processes. I'm sorry, 154-042. And then the last couple sections talk about, okay, what happens if the applicant wants to deviate from the plan? Well, it really depends on whether the deviation is minor or major. Basically, existing plan unit developments, I think, would go through the same process that was in place at the time they were approved. The general plan, if there's any changes to that, I think it go after the council has approved the PUD, would probably go back to the Planning Commission. We'd start over, make a recommendation. Council can then adopt another revised plan unit development for the project. There are times when there are certain minor adjustments, such as we got to move a street one way or the other, or move some lots because of topography or coal mines or something. Anything minor that doesn't change the real intent can be approved with the concurrence of the city engineer and planning and zoning director. And I think that is it. That probably covers the whole process. And I'm sure we'll have a hiccup or two now and then, but I think this is more reflective of a PUD, and it allows a little more flexibility, and we don't get hung up on what's attached, what's not attached, or what should the density be. we're going to look at our existing development patterns and our comprehensive plans and the ability of public resources to be able to serve the density to help make that. And then council will be involved, obviously, because they've got to adopt that zoning, so they'll need to be on board with what's being proposed as well.
Okay, any questions for Mr.
So that spells
Kaiser?
out kind of the changes as well as some of the text in there.
Any questions for Mr. Kaiser at this point?
I've got a few. So I think the main thing is, and you kind of just touched on it, but opening up this discussion is basically to provide, to put this more in line. It's more traditional PUD, like maybe in the past our PUD was really not a traditional one. It was a little bit.
It's how they were intended to be, but ours never got set up that way.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, so that was one question. Then I did have a question, the gross area of the PUD was changed from 30 to 25%.
That's for the open space.
For the open space. Is that what other PUDs generally have, or is that what prompted that change, I guess?
Well, yeah, looking at different communities and how they did PUDs, I've seen it as low as high and as high as 40. And we just felt that 25% might be a better number. No real rationale behind it, but at least a quarter of your development site has to remain in common open space. And that number seemed to pop up more than once in looking at other communities' codes.
I know that when we have had previous PUDs, sometimes that 30% seems like a lot, but it doesn't always accommodate, some of that open space to be available to other, majority of the residents and that sort of thing. Is that still the intention of that?
Well, the open space should be used for a couple things. One, as natural green infrastructure where possible, to protect, wetlands and streams from riparian courses, but also to allow for public recreation. And actually, I would say that even though our code in the past has required 30% open space, most of the projects come in well above it. I'm thinking, maybe not double, but I bet you it's a good 25 to 30% higher. So, 100-acre development, they might provide 45% of the land is common open space. So I don't think 25% as a minimum is too far off, because I suspect that what we'll actually see will come in a little bit higher than that.
Okay. And then I think my last question is on 154.035, and it talks about the permitted uses and structures. And so A2, it talks about multifamily dwellings. When it says it should not exceed 30% of the total residential units proposed, so is a multifamily, is that one unit, or is that however many units that are in there?
That's all multifamily units, so.
So let's say a multi-family unit that has 3 units within, is that considered one?
Those are, 1, 2, and 3 are considered single family. Because 1, 2, and 3 fall under different building codes.
Okay, so
I
that's
would look at it
30%
like
is.
this way. So if you have a development that, I can get 100 units, 100 dwelling units on this site, no more than 30% of those can be in multifamily buildings.
Gotcha.
So you couldn't have, all right, I've got, 70 single-family homes and then one building with 30 apartments. You could have that, but you couldn't go above that.
Gotcha.
Or you
Understood.
could have it in a couple of smaller apartments of, 15 each. But it's just a way to kind of cap how much, how many multifamily dwellings you could allow within the PUD. Because I think the points of PUDs were to kind of have a mixing of uses, not only different housing types, ranging from freestanding, lots to townhomes to rental units. And again, the rental units that we talk about, they could actually be above some of the commercial spaces if we ever got that type of development. So if someone had let's say someone had a corner lot at PUD at, say, I don't know, say Smoke Rise and Hartman, if that ever went through. Maybe someone could build at that entry a mixed-use development that you've got some retail shops on the first floor and maybe some condos and apartments on the second. I think it was meant to kind of think of that type of thing.
And then I do have one other question. I noticed that the density, let's see here, excuse me, the maximum density it talks about multifamily units should range between 3.75 and 7 units per acre over the entire project development area.
Correct.
Obviously, that's a pretty large range. Is that basically to provide flexibility for?
To provide flexibility and also to kind of keep in conformance to our some of our annexation guidelines, where we've identified certain areas where if they came in, you could, because they're close to other commercial sites, residential uses may be appropriate, but they would need to be at higher densities, because maybe someone's not going to buy a quarter-acre lot, behind Walmart or Home Depot or the old Kmart, which is now Tractor Supply. So I think it was allowed to allow for a range without tying us down to a number that may or may not work.
Gotcha. So it
and that's
provides
why-
flexibility for
Right. So what I'm saying
each
is
project to
in-
look at it
in
individually.
phases, and I think Briarthorne was a good example. I don't remember what their density was. It was a little higher than what our current code allows, because it was developed, originally approved back in '92. So let's say it's about 5.5 or 6 units per acre. You'll have some areas within that development where, if you calculated the density, it's about 3 or 4 units. And other areas on some streets, that density is a little bit higher. But over the whole project area, the total number divided by the land area, it comes out on average about 4 to 5.
Thank you.
Okay.
Could I ask a question? The provisions governing planned unit development, pre-existing planned unit developments, 154-033. Do I read this correctly, that an existing PUD would be able to take advantage of an opportunity that they might see in these new provisions?
Well, I think the point here was, one, anything that has been approved previously, it's a legal conforming use. It met those requirements at the time.
Right.
I think if they wanted to amend that PUD, then at that point, they would have to come back and basically follow these requirements. I don't expect that to happen. I think that most of the PUDs are already built. The one that is not built, they're making some minor changes. That would be Briarthorne. But the actual thing is, as long as their density doesn't go above what they were originally approved, if they have to move lots around, building sites around to handle, to address some of the underground mines and other issues, it may come back here for general plan, approval, but it really, in my opinion, doesn't result in an amendment to that plan. What it might is if we had one, let's say we had a development, a PUD, where it was half built, and they never built the second half, and then they decide, oh, hey, we've got a new idea for how we want to finish the second half. That second half would probably have to come in and be approved through this process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, though, if you take a look at 154-044, I think that's on the last page, in item A, the last sentence, is that in conforming language with the one we were just looking at?
Oh, good point, good point. Yeah. I would keep, yeah, you're right. I like the language here in 154-044, so that if you're going to amend a previously approved PUD, follow the process that it followed when it was originally adopted. So with that in mind, going back to 033, I would probably revise that language to match. Because, yeah, that could be a point of confusion.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from Mr. Kaiser? All right, if not, at this point, I would like to open the public hearing regarding the new planned unit development regulations. If there's anyone in the audience who would address the planning commission regarding that topic, if you'd please come forward to the podium to be sure name and address for the record. I don't think there's anybody here who wants to do that. So I will declare the public hearing closed.
No one has signed in.
All right. I would make one comment. I would commend Mr. Kaiser for his expertise and efforts to create this document. Sure. This is a piece of work that I'm sure will serve the city well in long term in developing planned unit developments better than what we have right now. So with that being said, also I would comment, I think Mr. Kaiser touched on this, this is the first step in the process. Commission will forward this to City Council. They have their own public hearing and will ultimately make the decision whether to adopt this legislation as forwarded by the Planning Commission. So unless there's any other comments by the commission, is there a motion?
What I would suggest is, again, to kind of keep things moving, because we're going to have a project on in the next few weeks. It's going to be developed under these new regulations as part of the pre-annexation agreement that was issued with council. So I would say any motion to approve this would be subject to revising sections 144.033 and 144.044 to eliminate any inconsistencies. But
Okay.
I think you're right. The more I look at it, I think Mr. Santos did point out, yeah, there seems to be something that doesn't add up. So we'll change it to make sure that old PUDs change according to your old regulations, new PUDs, you follow the new procedures.
Okay. All right, then we need a motion to approve with the changes as noted by Mr. Kaiser forward to council.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council the adoption of zoning amendments that pertain to planned unit developments, replacing existing sections 154.030 and 154.031.
Second?
You've heard the motion as with the changes as,
With the changes
Yeah,
we
with the
discussed tonight.
okay,
Still second.
still second. All right, you've heard the motion, the second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. The next, moving on, the next item is a public hearing regarding a zoning text amendment, revisions to regulating zoning amendments. Mr. Kaiser.
Okay, I think when we discussed this at the last meeting, the amendment would bring the city's zoning code requirements that pertain to public notice requirements for zoning amendments, bring it into alignment with Ohio Revised Code 713.12. That helps streamline the notice requirements and move things quickly. So what I wanted to point out is that ORC provides instructions by which the legislative authority of any city gives public notice to any zoning text or map amendment. That's because ultimately council is the only one that can change zoning. So I believe it states that, okay, we need to give at least 30 days public notice of the hearing for any proposed zoning text or map amendment. ORC also states that if the proposed ordinance intends to rezone or redistrict 10 or less parcels of land, then the legislative authority must provide written notice of that hearing to those 10 or less parcels plus all the properties that surround it. So that makes sense because typically 10 properties plus the neighbors, that's a reasonable number to notify. Anything over that, it gets very difficult to provide direct notice to everyone, to all the parties involved, and that can be done in other manners. Through, there's still the public notice in the newspapers. That might have been great in the 70s when this was adopted, but now there are other methods, putting on websites, social media sites. So there's other ways to get the word out there. But I also want to point out that the ORC doesn't really mention how municipal or how planning commissions are to handle public notice requirements. So those are typically addressed by the local zoning ordinance. And that's where section 154-540A kind of differs from what the ORC requires. So it does state that really anytime there's a zoning map or map amendment, that Planning Commission gives notice to the properties being considered for rezoning and all those that are around it. No limit on the number. So the problem comes in when we're doing a major rezoning of an entire area that may include 300, 400, 500 properties. That individual notice process gets very, very bogged down. I mean, it could take several weeks to get all of those particular notices out. And so this would bring the Planning Commission's requirements, it would make them the same as what the state requires for the ORC, per the ORC. And again, I think it makes sense to have regulations that are consistent, because if the Planning Commission, for instance, had to notify 45 people of a public hearing, but council only by law only has to notify 10 or less, it can create some, some tension. And I think it's just, it's fair and quicker to follow what the ORC finds is fair for the, for City Council, and follow that with the Planning Commission, because again, there are other methods of getting the word out there. And in fact, in the past, I've actually used our own website under the Planning Commission page to post notices for zoning text amendments, and then I can actually put the text on the, so here's the hearing, here's the date, here's what they're going to vote on, here's what they're going to review. So I think it just kind of simplifies the notification process, and it will speed things up, whenever we're dealing with a large number of properties. So that's all I have.
Okay, any questions, Mr. Kaiser? All right, at this time, I would like to open the public hearing regarding the zoning text amendments, revisions regarding the zoning amendments. If there's anyone in the audience who would address the Planning Commission? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. It seems to make sense that we shouldn't have two sets of rules. So,
Not when you're on the same topic.
and we've got a state standard, so we should go with that, from my opinion. All right, we have a recommendation for staff. Again, this is an advisory capacity from the Planning Commission to City Council. They'll have to take this up, have their own public hearing, and make the final decision. So with that all said, is there a motion to forward this to City Council?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council the adoption of revisions to Section 154-580 regarding the notification requirements, so that the Planning Commission and City Council are operating under the rules consistent with the Ohio Revised Code 713-12.
Second.
You've heard the motion and the second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Commissioners, anything else you'd like to bring up this evening? Mr. Kaiser, anything under other business or anything else?
No, nothing today. We do have one new case for the meeting on March 24th, so we'll be back here in 2 weeks.
All right. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
We're adjourned.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.